2,000 is something we can afford to take this poll of voters. I'll be supporting it, and I hope folks will also support it. Go to if you don't support the concept or you don't think it's a good idea, when the referendum is up, you can vote no. So, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Holschbach. Supervisor Falkowski, you are next.
Thank you. I remember that the resolution that was presented to us about gerrymandering was on October 30th, 2017. That was when the first one came out in front of the body here. I was reluctant because I didn't think that the Supreme Court had any ruling on the merits of that whole case. I mean, we were getting in front of the movement here. So I didn't vote for it, and I didn't affirm that resolution at that time, but others did. I thought it was not in our best interest, and we were getting in front of the facts, and it had a tendency to actually migrate towards more partisanship because everybody kind of knew how this was going to play out. Ironically, the resolutions that were being asked for procedures of nonpartisanship for redistricting actually right now has not been completed. And so once again, I think we are getting in front of the facts. It is interesting as the cost of these activities happen, it's primarily because of court challenges. I mean, if you intrinsically just have to do the process, it would be cost effective to do it. But every time somebody's harmed by the notion of nonpartisan district defining, somebody takes it up the courts, and that is usually really occupies a lot of cost. So unfortunately, it's not a real easy way to find a solution to this. But ironically, the topics which is clamoring about most of the time now is about meddling with elections. Anyone here see the irony implicit about advisory referendums that hasn't met legal challenges, but yet we're inducing a political side to get out there to get more voters for opinions? That's kind of like an alternative interference of a way. I mean, if we want people to vote and not have any interference, then maybe we should take their words directly to what they need to speak to the legislators that are actually going to draw the maps. Decades before the political interests figured out ways of weaponizing the actual gerrymandering, it rotated between political interest almost like a mutual assured destruction. These battles went on for elections and elections, and who took over authority at that time actually ended up redefining the jurisdictions for their advantage. This topic is sometimes like the Electoral College. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the popular tallies versus the Electoral College, but all that does is evokes these epiphany about changes, and yet the changes are not necessarily mathematically an advantages to anybody. Usually positioning to advantage one political party is interested over the others, basically to regain like authority. One of the interesting things that I shared with Jen is I got a hold of Jessica and to find out some of the interesting numbers. Yes, we have 64,000 eligible voters, and then when you see the margins between 27% and 64%, this is really in our best interest that for our constituency to maybe encourage them to more directly contact the legislators who are responsible for devising these maps, because quite frankly, even on these elections, you'll have a percentage that'll be one way saying we shouldn't be doing this, the other one's probably looking at it from a cost standpoint, and another person says we really need to find fairness and equitability, and this is a better solution. And quite frankly, there's another group that don't really care. But yeah, we have to represent everybody. I mean, the ones that want to be engaged, the ones that do want to be engaged activist-wise. But the question is, are we doing them any justice by taking the mantle and saying, we're gonna put it on your shoulders? Your shoulders are actually to contact those legislators and say, you know, we don't agree with the way the boundaries are being defined. We don't have the authority to tell the legislators to do that. we're kind of like being a proxies trying to get the constituency out there. And then we're going to look at the math. And quite frankly, I think it was Supervisor Bank. He said maybe 80% of these people will say, yeah, it's a good idea. And it is. But factually, is that the information that these legislators need? Because a lot of them is going to be discounted. So I probably am not going to support this resolution, and primarily because I'd like to have more of the people engaged directly with their legislators where this needs to happen, not necessarily with an advisory referendum, which quite frankly almost seems to be adding or asking for election interference in a way, because they're going to draw a target of a subject that maybe people aren't really aware of. So no, I'm not going to support it. But it was interesting when I know people toss out little tidbits here, but I think it was Winston Churchill said the best argument against democracy is to have a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Maybe they got a point there. So thank you, Mr.
Thank you. I was going to hold my comments to the end, but I've got to say a few things, I guess. Very interesting comments. I guess one of my rationale for supporting this, and I will never defer from hearing from my constituents or anybody in this county, and maybe there is a responsibility of contacting the legislatures, but we also act as their representatives, and we have every right under the sun to enact legislation to potentially talk or influence our legislators, not only in Madison, but Washington, D.C. as well. The thing I found interesting in this whole discussion as I was looking into more of the background of this was, and as Supervisor Banky said, obviously, I know both sides do this. It's definitely a partisan issue. I'm not going to dispute that. But last session, the Democratic Assembly and Senate introduced legislation to create something like this. There was no Republican co-sponsors of that bill. Obviously, it didn't even get a hearing or nothing, and it went nowhere. There was 4 of these referendums held in the southeastern part of Wisconsin. I know La Crosse County had one, and I wish I could remember the other county in southwestern Wisconsin. This past session, there was 4 members of the assembly that were Republican that actually signed on as co-sponsors. And those counties that had the referendums, that's where those legislators were from. I just find that very interesting. All right, Supervisor Swade, you are next.
Thank you. Talk about gerrymandering, and I can remember way back when Alan Lassay was in the Senate, how they went right around his house and put him in a different district so that he couldn't run in his own. So gerrymander has been there. But looking at this resolution, I do agree with Supervisor Benke on a lot of these issues. We know how it's going to turn out. This is what we call a feel-good resolution. It's like putting on a resolution saying, do you believe in capital punishment in the public schools? How that's going to turn out. I think it's just a foregone conclusion, and everybody knows this. It makes people feel good when they vote that way, and I'm not going to support it.
Thank you, Supervisor Swade. Supervisor Bruner, you were next.
Thank you. And I guess all I really want to say is I guess I was impressed with the number of voters in my district that actually emailed me yesterday in support of this move. So they're making it fairly easy for me to say, I definitely will support this tonight. But the voters really helped me make this decision.
Thank you, Supervisor Bruner. Supervisor Dizek, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Supervisor Swade, you took the words right out of my mouth. I feel this is also a feel-good resolution. The way it's worded, of course, we want a nonpartisan way of doing this. There's no details. The whole thing is it's going to be partisan no matter what you do. Who's going to appoint the people? It's another bureaucratic step. I don't think this is going to be resolved in any kind of a near future. It works in Iowa, but it may not work here. I mean, there's some things over there in Iowa where it said you can even go to court there. And as divided as we are as a society at any level, I think that's what would happen anyhow. So I don't feel I can support this for the lack of any detail in the resolution, in what you're going to put on the ballot. Anybody goes in there and looks at it, is going to go, yeah, I want that. And like Supervisor Benke said, you're going to probably get a good 70% approval. So I don't think that's a measure of what our citizens really think. It's just a feel-good thing when they look at it, and I just can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Dizak. Supervisor Hanson, you were next.
Mr. Chair, I like feeling good. All right.
Please.
70
I know you want to applaud, but please hold it.
I'm sorry, but
Applause.
65 to 75% of the people who voted in those counties said, yes, this is a good idea. You would think the legislators may wake up and go, hey, it is a good idea. So let's start talking about what we can do in Madison. But they're not doing anything. That many people, what else in this country do that many people agree on? And we are doing nothing in Madison, even though they held 4 referendums, and one of them was Vernon County. I don't think that's a hotbed of liberal whatever. And Madison goes, oh, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to keep doing what we do. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, you're going to gerrymander. And that's wrong. And now we have the governor who's probably going to veto anything that comes to him that doesn't look good. So then where does it end up? In the court. We all know how neutral the courts are now because you either run as a Democrat or you run as a Republican. So where's the solution? Do we just accept this? Do we just keep saying, well, maybe that's why nobody calls their representative because maybe they feel it doesn't matter anymore. We got to change things. Wisconsin used to be a place that at least listened and was progressive. Not progressive in a bad way, but we listened. And what do we do now? We crawl into our Dem caucus. We crawl into our Republican caucus. We draw lines so we keep the other party out of power. So some counties have some referendums. 42 counties sent down their little resolutions saying, we want neutral people deciding this. And what happened? Nothing. How are we going to change this? Watch that circus on TV the last 2 weeks. Maybe that's why I was passionate, Supervisor Benke. I watched too much of that. I watched too much of those guys interrupting each other, disrespecting each other. But they don't have to worry about their seats. They don't have to worry about getting thrown out because they're safe. If you're in a blue district that was gerrymandered, you're safe. If you're in a red district and it's gerrymandered, you're safe. Unless you're lucky and you live in Pennsylvania because they had to change their districts. They were so bad. And it was pretty cool today because they were interviewing the Republican or Democrat. I don't know who she was, but their district now is 40% Democrat, 40% Republican, 20% independent voters. So people maybe have to be a little bit in tune with everybody in those districts to get elected. So yeah, it's not going to change it overnight, but maybe we send out another result that says, hey, there's another part of the state that says we need to do this differently. And maybe those guys in Madison and those ladies in Madison will wake up. Because right now they do what they want. Or they do who gives them money to get them elected. But they sure as heck aren't representing the people of the state anymore. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Hanson. Supervisor Zimmer, you were next.
Yes, I'm certainly going to vote against this resolution because the way resolutions are worded determines how many people will vote for them. Nonpartisan sounds like such a wonderful term. There is no such thing as nonpartisan, and there never will be. It's like when you use the term blue ribbon committee, of nonpartisan citizens who will make a report. That just never works out. And by the way, I'm so sick and tired of people using the word democracy when they talk about our form of government. If we lived in a democracy, we would all gather together and vote on these things directly. We would vote on how we want, the congressional and other political divisions created. But we're not a democracy. We are a republic, and we send our elected representatives to the legislatures, like this body, to make decisions for us. And if that's the way it works in a free republic. And that's the way it ought to work, because it hasn't failed us for over 200 and some odd years in this country. I mean, if you don't like what's going on with your legislator, you have to politically work to change that legislature. And it can be done. But that's how you do it in a republic. And that's how we'll continue to do it. I talked to Paul Tittle recently, and he said, our assemblyman for 25th Assembly District, and he said, look, Don, we've got, and I talked to him about this issue. He said, we've got a Republican-dominated legislature, we've got a governor, and we can't do anything without his assent, and he can't do anything without our assent. So he said, we'll work it out. For better or worse, that's exactly what we'll do. And so the idea of having as Supervisor Swade put it so eloquently, a feel-good resolution is an exercise in utter futility, and I will vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Zimmer. Supervisor Droll, you are next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too voted this out of our committee so everybody could discuss it, even though I wasn't willing to support it and won't at this time. I always feel we're very frugal with the taxpayers' dollars in Manitowoc County and on this board particularly. And I think even though it's $1,600 or $2,000, I think that's too much money to spend on this resolution, because I think everybody wishes that this issue was nonpartisan, but it is not. And it is not on either side of the aisle, whoever happens to be in control of the legislature. And I, for one, may be pessimistic about this, but I don't think that's going to change until society, one way or the other, changes, and the people that would change this would be in the majority to allow that. So I just don't feel it's a wise use of the taxpayers' dollar. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Droll. Supervisor Holschbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I think that saying that this is feel good is, to me, that's so cynical and negative, meaning there's no way that getting your actual constituents, people who vote for you, registered voters, to go to give their say in an advisory fashion. So I understand, it sounds like Supervisor Falkowski is against advisory referendums, which is fine. But having worked and having experience with elected officials from both sides of the aisle and in different processes, yes, there is such a thing as nonpartisan. It can be done. The Legislative Reference Bureau is, and again, I bet every Republican and every Democrat in the legislature right now would say the Legislative Reference Bureau is nonpartisan. So it can be done. Every tax dollar is important. So Supervisor Droll, $2,000, yes. I would just go back to if this adds to what legislators are hearing, and this is a way for constituents to communicate with their legislatures, just more en masse, but it's registered voters saying a nonpartisan method. They're not going to write detail exactly how you would do the entire process in in a referendum question, but they could add who would be the entity that's responsible. But I don't think that changes. This question is simply, should it be nonpartisan or partisan when we draw the map? And I think advisory referendums do have a place, and they don't interfere with a republic or a democracy.
Thank you, Supervisor Holzrock. Supervisor Metzger, you were next.
I also received phone calls on this, people asking me to support this, and saying that this is frugal, that we're wasting the taxpayers' money. It's the taxpayers' money that we're using to support this. And if most of them would like this, and we know they would like this and support it, I think they should have a right to their voice on the ballot, and I think that this should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Metzger. Any other discussion on the motion? I see Supervisor Hendrickson took a little trip. So I guess I'll speak for a little bit, I guess, and talk slowly, yes. Anyways, I think there's very good discussion on both sides here. I mean, obviously, I'm going to support this. Anytime you have an ability to get the opinion of your constituents, of your residents, of whether it be your county, your district, state, it's always a great opportunity, and this is one of those opportunities. The argument that it's going to pass 70-30, 75-25, I don't think is there, because remember, and we went back and we had an advisory referendum on the box store resolution discussion at the state level. Actually, County Executive Zigbar vetoed that, and it was his first override. We overrode that veto, and we had that referendum on the ballot. Actually, our county was barely 60-40 in support of that. I was kind of shocked. Maybe, should I say, like what people are saying, maybe the voters don't know what they're talking about? I don't believe in that. I believe people knew what the issue was. Some didn't support it. I was surprised. Maybe we'll have this referendum and maybe we'll be shocked. It'll be 60-40 again. Maybe it'll be 50-50. We don't know that. I know people I talk to support the nonpartisan approach to redistricting. Of course, but we'll see that, I guess. We'll see what happens, I guess. I hope this passes tonight, and I'll go from there. Supervisor Giroux, you can speak again.
I have a personal comment. I went to UW-Madison. I have a degree in political science and American institutions, and I worked for the assembly for 2 years. Everett Boley was our assemblyman at the time, and I was his administrative aide. We had a committee on excise and fees. And he became the assembly chief clerk, and then I worked for him at that point in time. When I was in that assembly, almost all the assembly people were friends. No matter what you did during the day, everybody went over to the Senate for happy hour, and it was like that. And they had this group of guys on both sides of the aisle. They had been there like for 18 years. And they were called Wisdom Row, and they were Democrats and Republicans and stuff like that. And they didn't, or we didn't have at that time, these divisive primaries where if you weren't a zealot for your side of the aisle, you wouldn't get elected. Back then, it just seemed like there were very little difference. People were there to do the people's business, and most of them were bar owners and farmers at the time, because they were the ones that had the time to go to be legislators. And I was a big part of this for 2 years. It was a big part of my life. And I was amazed what it was then and what it is now. And I don't know how it can go back because of the way that it happened now. And I just wanted to share that. There was a time. There truly was a time.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Giroux. And I agree. I guess I still have faith that we can eventually get back to that. I mean, I use local government as a prime example. Obviously, some of us are more partisan than each other, but I think for the most part, we work together very well, not only at the county level, but at the city level as well, the town level, the village level. I think all of us do a great job. And of course, you stick up for your values at times, and you're going to definitely stick up for your constituents. And sometimes that shows a little bit, but for the most part, I think we do a darn good job at the local level. And I wish Madison and Washington, D.C. could follow that as well. If there's no other discussion, I will have the clerk conduct the vote.
Supervisors will now vote on the resolution authorizing advisory referendum question on the creation of a nonpartisan procedure for the preparation of legislative and congressional redistricting plans and maps.
The resolution passes 14-11 with Supervisors Vogt, Williams, Gauger, Zimmer, Benke, Kavanaugh, Mink, Falkowski, Gerald, Dizak, and Swade voting no. So we will go from there, and we'll see. I guess we have until next county board meeting to a potential overall veto, so we'll see where that goes. All right, that's all I have for the executive committee. Any questions regarding the executive committee? Thank you very much. We'll move along to Expo Ice Center Board. Supervisor Gauger is the chair, or one of our representatives there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Expo Ice Center Board met December 11th. We had a good discussion about looking at different acts and entertainment, whatever, at the Bears Convention next month. We have got a new soda contract for the next 3 years. We had reviewed our comptroller's financial report. We had Rummage-A-Rama Saturday, was sold out. We actually had a waiting list trying to get in. And to me, I thought it was pretty good. Supervisor Hendrickson was a vendor there. He could probably tell you how good the attendance was, or if he did any good.
Very good attendance and very good participation in the county. They do an excellent job. Expo activities, thank you. But this is the first time we ever participated, and I was very well pleased with the turnout and with the way it was set up. Kudos to that Expo committee out there.
And that concludes my report.
Any questions for Supervisor Gauger? Thank you very much. Highway Committee, Supervisor Benke is the chair.
Mr. Chair, before I read all the bridge petitions at a request from Supervisor Mink, I'll go through the first part of my report. No, I will not be reading all the bridge petitions. We had a meeting prior to this meeting downstairs, mainly for the purpose of a airport lease transfer, which is basically just transferring the lease from one hangar owner to another. We also talked about the bidlets that came out for the project on County Highway S, which is the bridge just north of JJ. That bridge, the let was still within the 1% of what we projected that bid to be, so the bid was pretty good. Most times when we bid that stuff early, the bids are a little bit better than if you wait later in the year. Then the projects get a little bit busier and the prices go up. The other one was the CL, which is the by McDonald's to Hecker Road, CL there around the curve by American and Harley Davidson there. That project came in substantially less than what we had projected, so that bid was good too. That project will start probably sometime in June. The bridge on S might start earlier. That's in the DOT and the DNRs on their desk at this point. So whether we are able to start that bridge early is up to them. But those were two projects that we talked about. We talked about overtime voucher and we approved the vouchers. We will meet February 11th. We're changing our meeting time, which is normally 4:30 to 4 o'clock. I've also instructed Mark to make sure that the packet that we get as a committee, and I appreciate Supervisor Hanson reaching out and wanting to get that information. And so we're going to get that information. I think it's important that the packet that the committees get, the county, since it's electronic, I mean, that you get that same information, because it is enlightening when you're reading the minutes. As Supervisor Hanson said, some of that information in advance will help you understand some of those things. So look for that packet of information to come out prior to our highway committee meeting in February. And we'll try to keep that information coming your direction. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Any questions for Supervisor Benke? Thank you very much. Human Services Board, Supervisor Hendrickson is the chair.
Mr. Supervisor Kavanaugh will read the report. Thank you.
Okay. I will turn it over to Supervisor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Human Services Board met last Thursday, December 12th. We had our education topic was an overview of the crisis services by Betsy Johnson. She works with people that are in crisis, possibly talking about suicide and so on. She follows up by going, if the need is there, to jails, hospitals. She said sometimes all these people need actually is someone to talk to. She said once she had a woman that was in crisis that she helped, and then the same person went into that field as her job. So far this year, she noted that they've had over 1,400 call-ins. Financial report by our director, Patricia Dodge, she projects a surplus of over $340,000 at the end of this year because of extra grants that they applied for and so on. So excellent job by both our director and our co-directors. Mr. Ziggebauer handed out a report on the juvenile detention situation. It's a little higher than normal right now, but it showed that we still made a good decision when we went with Sheboygan County. Otherwise, it would be costing us big time compared to what it is. And next meeting will be Thursday, January 23rd at the Human Services Building. That concludes my report.
Any questions for Supervisor Kavanaugh? Thank you very much. Land Conservation Committee, UW Extension, Education, and Agricultural Committee. Supervisor Wagner is the chair.
Thank you, Chairman Brian. We have a resolution in front of you. The resolution is creating a Bullhead Lake District and appointing initial District Board of Commissioners. A verified petition was filed with the Manitowoc County Clerk on October 2nd, 2019, requesting the establishment of a public inland lake protection and rehabilitation district to be known as Bullhead Lake District. And the petition was accompanied by a description and sketch indicating the approximate area and boundaries of the proposed district. A public hearing was held on the proposed district by the Manitowoc County Land Conservation Committee on October 16, 2019, pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes 33.26. And a notice of the hearing was published in a Class 1 notice and mailed to the last known address of each landowner within the proposed district. The Land Conservation Committee has issued a report on the proposed district. So this is a resolution. I will still move. So moved.
So motion by Supervisor Wagner, second by Supervisor Niles. Discussion on the motion. Supervisor Mink.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor. I am a huge supporter of this. I sat there with this when we had that discussion about this. What I really, really, really like about this is that the local inhabitants are taking charge of it. That they want a clean lake. Now, this pond, this is from runoff from 80 years ago. So, I mean, we're doing the right things on keeping, runoff from entering this lake. So I know this will not be a permanent solution, but I think this is a great start at bringing back that lake to being a much more environmental friendly lake. At the same time, the people who live around the lake are going to be taking care of the problem, and that they're going to do a much better job than I ever will, because I live 20 minutes away from there and don't know exactly what the lake even looks like. So I hugely support this, and I hope you guys do too. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Mink. Any other discussion on the motion? See none, the clerk will now conduct the vote.
Supervisors will now vote on the resolution creating Bullhead Lake District and appointing initial District Board of Commissioners.
Resolution passes 25-0.
The next meeting of the Land Conservation will be January 16th at 4:45 at the County Office Complex. And the meeting for the UW Extension, Education, and Agriculture Committee will be this Thursday, the 19th at 4:45 at the Office Complex. That's the end of my report. Thank you.
Any questions for Supervisor Wagner? Thank you very much. Personnel Committee, Supervisor Marsh is the chair.
Thank you. I have three resolutions to bring to you tonight. First resolution is amending the Employee Policy Manual 11.03 of the Uniform Allowance. So I so move.
So motion by Supervisor Marsh, second by Supervisor Benke. Discussion on the motion. See none? The clerk will now conduct the vote.
Supervisors will now vote on the resolution amending Employee Policy Manual, Section 11.03, Uniform Allowance.
Motion passes 25-0.
The second resolution is resolution amending Employee Policy Manual 18.02. It's a clarifying of the overtime, and it's basically self-explanatory in the resolution. I so move.
So motion by Supervisor Marsh, second by Supervisor Bauman. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the clerk will now conduct the vote.
Supervisors will now vote on the resolution amending Employee Policy Manual, Section 18.02, overtime.
Resolution passes 25-0.
The last resolution is establishing the elected officials' compensation. We set up this criteria. The county board passed an ordinance creating this Manitowoc County Code 5.06, setting the elected official compensation, and that was passed and adopted by the county board on October 10th, 2017. That set in motion the way that the elected officials' compensation is set up. So we follow this criteria, and it's really a wonderful way of doing it instead of pulling numbers from the sky. So I so move.
So motion by Supervisor Marsh, second by Supervisor Vogel. Discussion on the motion. See none, the clerk will now conduct the vote.
Supervisors will now vote on the resolution establishing elected officials' compensation, County Clerk, Register of Deeds, and Treasurer.
Supervisor Swade, would you try again, please? Thank you. Motion carries 25-0.
And our next meeting is February 4th, unless we need to meet before that, and that ends my report.
Any questions for Supervisor Marish? Thank you very much. Planning and Park Commission, Supervisor Dyzak is the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We met briefly yesterday with a very short agenda. We approved a variance for Douglas and Kathy Wallander to create a parcel of approximately 5.5 acres in an area zoned as exclusive ag, and that's too small for that type of a zoning, but we approved that variance. Next, the commission approved the acceptance of the bid from the Greenwood Project Management for the Maribel Caves Park Pavilion project at a cost of $392,900. It is important to note here that there's no effect on the county budget whatsoever, as this will totally be funded by grant money, and that's a real positive thing for Maribel. If you've never been to the Maribel Caves, you really should go there. That's a gem of Manitowoc County. Our next meeting will be January 27th, and that concludes my report.
Any questions for Supervisor Dyzak? Thank you very much. Public Safety Committee, Supervisor Vogel is the chair.
Mr. Chair, we met on December 11th. Sheriff Hartwig gave a report on his staffing vacancies, and they have 3 active military deployments at this time. The budget is going to be, revenue is in the black right now for the jail. There's in the process of filling openings in the jail for correctional officers. On patrol, the 3 military deployments have been or soon will be completed. They have 1 officer in training. They got a continued list of hiring lists for patrol, correctional officers, and for reserve deputies as well. Chief Deputy Brian Knack spoke about the squad car bids. They were notified in September that the model that they were using was going to be discontinued and final orders were being taken. The Sheriff's Department then worked with the comptroller and this year used the state bidding system for the squads. And squads were ordered for 7 2020 Chevrolet Tahoes at $35,803 each for a total cost of $250,621. This was included in the 2020 budget. Register and probate Pat Coppa gave a report regarding court fees and costs in probate. Patricia Coppa provided the committee with a memo regarding procedures that can be commenced in her office without any filing fees. The memo is based upon one compiled by the Door County Register and Probate and is being represented at county boards throughout the state. It has to do with fee structures and fees that are different from the clerk of court's office to the probate offices. Recommendation was made and maybe contact Assemblyman Paul Tittle to see if something could be done on the state side. And that concludes my report. We don't have any set date for the next meeting. It's either going to be on January 8th at the Health Department, which is the second Thursday, or before the next county board meeting on January 21st of 2020. And that concludes my report.
Any questions for Supervisor Vogel? Thank you very much. Public Works Committee, Supervisor Giroux is the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Public Works Committee met December 11th. There were no donation reports, ethics code reports, or public comment. We reviewed and discussed the solid waste and recycling programs, the building and grounds division, the capital projects. We had a pay request for Otis Elevator that we approved. We discussed the Hecker Vivon property. There's no recent update. City of Manitowoc has until the end of this month to conduct their environmental and geotechnical investigations. We discussed the communications division, the information services division, talked about the expo, and approved the proclamation for the fairest of the fair. And I just want to say, I don't think we say it enough that we really have excellent people working in all our county departments. And I think everybody on this board genuinely cares on what they do for their constituents and in working with their people in these various departments. And I would just like to wish all of you a Merry Christmas. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Any questions for Supervisor Giroux? Thank you very much. Transportation Coordinating Committee, Supervisor Bauman is our chair there.
Transportation meets tomorrow night here in the basement at 4 o'clock. And I'd just like to add to Supervisor Kavanaugh's deal about the crisis calls. There were 1,400 crisis calls through October, the end of October, in the daytime, but there were also about the same amount made in the evening. So they handle about 2,800 crisis calls through October. And I think that human services, I agree with Supervisor Giroux about our departments. I can't say enough about all of them. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Any questions for Supervisor Bauman? Thank you very much. I guess under announcements, I guess I was going to end, and it's all right. I'm glad as other supervisors I mentioned, but Supervisor Giroux, you kind of said it best because I was going to wish a Merry Christmas to everybody and a Happy New Year as well to our employees. And, you know, this is the last meeting of the year, and it's also the last county board meeting of the decade, unless there's an emergency, God forbid, before the end of the year. So it'll be interesting. I think Supervisor Giroux, you said a lot of, and I can't remember exactly. It was, for my paraphrase, the wall of fame, I guess, or the wall of the senators that were in Madison. I like to think that even though we may not be that wall of fame, we're certainly not the hall of shame either. We do a very good job here, and our employees certainly do as well. There was a very good discussion here tonight, and I think everybody was very respectful of each other. We disagreed, but we sometimes have to agree to disagree. So great job. Merry Christmas, everybody, once again. Happy New Year. We'll see you next year. I'll accept the motion to adjourn. Motion by Supervisor Droll, second by Supervisor Marish. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a safe trip home.